Yeah, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to welcome you this morning on behalf of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, on behalf of 3 of our worldwide offices, namely for the 5 Nordic countries, the United Kingdom and Ireland, and the representation to the United Nations in New York. My name is Gabriele Baumann, and I'm joining you from Stockholm today. The topic of this morning, as we had planned it earlier in January, is to discuss the accomplishments and the ongoing impact of Norway and Ireland after more than 1 year on the United Nations Security Council. But everything has, after February 24th, been overshadowed by the war in Ukraine, with an unprecedented violation of international law and the core principles of the United Nations by Russia. As a result, and this is the name of our meeting today, we are in the midst of the United Nations' biggest stress test. Our moderator will therefore, of course, relate to that and has prepared questions to our 2 speakers from Norway and Ireland, the permanent representatives of their countries. And it will be about changing dynamics and possible reforms around the Security Council as well. So how to deal also with Russia that hasn't shown any reliability in diplomatic processes at all in recent years. But I would now like to give the floor to my colleague, Andrea Ostheimer, who I personally know for many, many years. And she has been with the Konrad Adenauer Foundation for years in Berlin and Brussels, in Congo, South Africa, and now in the United States. She is joining us today from New York. I would now like to wish us an interesting exchange. Thank you, and I give the floor to you, Andrea.
Thank you so much, Gabriele, for your introduction, and it's my pleasure to welcome today Her Excellency, Madam Ambassador Geraldine Byrne-Mason, Permanent Representative of Ireland to the United Nations. Ambassador Byrne-Mason has also long-standing career in multilateral affairs with postings in Vienna and Geneva. And you are in New York representing Ireland at the United Nations in 2017, and also undertook a very successful career of bringing Ireland into the Security Council. Thank you so much for being with us today. And it is my pleasure also to welcome Her Excellency, Madam Ambassador Mona Juul, Permanent Representative of Norway to the United Nations. Ambassador Juul has been one of the key facilitators in the Oslo Accords, so also has a long-standing track record in mediation and peace process facilitation. And prior to or already as a first task of being the representative at the UN in New York, Ambassador Juul was also chairing the ECOSOC. She was the president of ECOSOC in 2019. And now is also representing Norway in the Security Council. It's a pleasure having both of you today with us. Your agendas are extremely tight these days when the UN is probably facing its most severe stress test since its creation in 1945. We really appreciate your availability. So let us start with the conversation right away. And I actually would like to ask our audience to send me their questions through the Q&A box. I will take them up and weave them into our conversation as we go along. Certainly, as Gabriele mentioned, the war in Ukraine is overshadowing everything these days. Its repercussions on energy and food markets have turned it within a few days into a real global crisis. And with the unprecedented step of a veto power on the Security Council invading a neighboring country, attacking the civilian population, and violating all norms of international humanitarian law, as well as the core principles of the UN Charter, the Security Council became paralyzed. Since then, we have seen a very assertive UN General Assembly uniting in the spirit of the Uniting for Peace resolution. And 2 General Assembly resolutions have been passed early on in March, demonstrating an act of solidarity with Ukraine and isolating Russia. 141, respectively 140 states voted in favor of these resolutions that condemned Russia's act of aggression. And on 7th of April, the General Assembly also suspended the membership of Russia in the Human Rights Council. And a latest move last week has been that the General Assembly unanimously adopted Resolution 76-262 that gives a standing mandate to the General Assembly to debate whenever a veto is cast in the Security Council. So, Madam Ambassador Yule, let us start with these last moves by the General Assembly. Do you think that this new level of accountability on the P5 will change dynamics in the Security Council?
First of all, thank you so much for inviting us to this very, very important debate. My short answer to your question is yes, but let me elaborate. It is undoubtedly now that over the years also preceding this very, very important vote in the General Assembly, it has increasingly become more difficult, or to put it simply, more unpopular to use the veto among the P5s. And there have been also initiatives earlier to try to sort of to restrict the use of veto, which has been one of a very important part of Norway's and also Ireland's effort to try to make the Security Council more transparent, more looking into the working methods, being more sort of democratic in a sense. And we have had initiatives on the veto. Also previously, there is or has been for a long while a French-Mexican initiative saying that the veto power veto should not be used faced with mass atrocities and war crimes. There have been also now then the initiative that proved to make this very important consensus resolution has been there for a while, but the timing was now ripe to put it to the General Assembly, and I have no doubt that the bar is now raised for the veto powers to use it, to be confronted or to explain to the General Assembly why it was necessary to use a veto. I think that will make a lot of difference.
Thank you. The timing was right. Madam Ambassador Berninason, we see now this invigorated, assertive General Assembly. Is this perhaps also the right timing and a window of opportunity for much needed reforms around the Security Council? Sorry, you are still muted.
Apologies. Thank you for inviting me here this morning. It's great to be here with Mona Yule, speaking to you all on a sunny New York morning. Look, you know, I think that the veto resolution in the General Assembly was definitely a sign of hope. I think we have to take it as such. It's the first step forward that we have seen, certainly in my time here in the last 5 years in New York. Ireland has been one of the founding members of the group that worked very hard on this resolution and pushed it forward. So it was a moment of also a realization of something that a lot of countries in the UN had worked hard for. It's not 6 months ago since Russia used its veto in the Security Council against a resolution that Ireland put on the table on climate and security. But as Mona put it there, now in the context of the horrific, devastating consequences of Russia's war in Ukraine, we're seeing a moment of opportunity. And I hope that this step with the resolution in the GA will do two things. One, that it will generate some more cooperation in the council. That's an aspiration. But I think the point Mona makes that the bar is now higher means that really internally in the council, let's hope it has a sobering effect on the use of the veto. And then secondly, it's a big strike for transparency and accountability in the General Assembly. Now, to your question, is there a bigger window of opportunity here? I'm an optimist, and I really hope that this is a marker and that we will look back in time to come about when this threshold was crossed to see it. But I'm also realistic, and I'm under no illusion about the scale of the challenge we're talking about here. Ireland, I think I can also say Norway, we've long argued against this anachronistic tool per se. The veto should not be used by anyone, anywhere, at any time. We use that phrase in relation to other tools. This, we believe, should be dispensed with, full stop. So if a crisis like we're facing in Ukraine now can't force a moment of serious reflection in the General Assembly, across the House as a whole, and particularly amongst permanent members who have it in their power to address this, then it's very hard to see when we will begin to move forward. So I'll end on an optimistic note. We have made progress. We have put a marker down. Ireland will be delighted to see this having its intended effect, not just in the General Assembly, hopefully also in the Security Council.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador. You mentioned just the last veto by Russia on one of your resolutions. In order to advance many issues on the agenda of the Security Council, you need the constructive engagement of Russia. With its international isolation and also severe sanctions in place, what kind of attitude can you already see by Russia? Are they playing hardball? Are they trying to use spoiler tactics? Or are they still a delegation one can work with on selected issues? We're still muted.
Sorry, it's my fault. I'll leave my mic on, excuse me. I'm afraid my answer to this question isn't going to be as optimistic as the last, perhaps. I think it's very clear that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is going to have a lasting and a negative effect, certainly in relation to the work of the Council and the dynamic. But also I'm concerned about the legitimacy of the Council in the eyes of the world. That was a point that was very poignantly, powerfully made by President Zelensky when he addressed the Security Council last month. We're already seeing Russia at the table instrumentalize the Security Council, using it as a platform for propaganda is the only word we can use to describe it. We are seeing, we've just discussed that, the veto power brazenly being abused. I think it's fair to say we're seeing a hardening of positioning on other files, and that's being exacerbated by what effectively is now a rupture in the relationship between the permanent members. And that all may sound very abstract, but actually, as Mona and I know, on a day-to-day basis, the favorable relations, let me take a concrete example, the favorable relations between Russia and the United States, for example, this time last year were critical to something that Mona and I worked on so hard, which was the Syria humanitarian resolution. Both of us are pen holders on the Security Council, really an entrusted, privileged role we play. But we depend on the relationship between Russia and the United States to facilitate the adoption of that. We expect that relationship to be problematic for us this year, obviously. I think we can also expect difficult dynamics in concrete terms on upcoming European Union authorizations, for example, on Operation Irini in relation to Libya in the Mediterranean, on Althea in Bosnia. I would also point out to everyone here this morning that Ukraine is not the only crisis that we're dealing with. I think in our introduction, we heard it's a shadow cast over all our work. That's true, but we're still mandated broadly for international peace and security. And we have a responsibility to the people of Yemen, to the people of Afghanistan, to the people of Somalia, Ethiopia. It doesn't stop where other crisis, conflict, insecure situations are in the spotlight. And so, frankly, constructive engagement with Russia is necessary to make progress right across a range of issues at the Security Council. It's true for all our members, for all 15 of us. Norway and Ireland never have issues between us. It's easy for us to talk, but we also need to be able to talk to all of our other partners at the table. It is fundamentally a team effort at the Security Council table. And for permanent members who wield a veto, they have an extra responsibility to help make that work. And, you know, in the past weeks, we have managed, even despite what it looks like from the outside, we have managed to adopt, for example, press statement on Afghanistan, on Darfur, on the Great Lakes, on the Chemical Weapons Convention. So we are at our core individually determined to do our jobs. We just have to find ways to bring this together despite the scale of the challenges. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much. And I actually can weave in already our first follow-up question from the audience. Stefano shared asked,
Could I just add to what I agree with everything Geraldine said, but everything she said, and we have decided that we can just switch our speeches and talking points because they are more or less the same all the time. But just as an example that we have been able to continue constructively working despite the Ukraine crisis is that we managed to get a very good and a very robust mandate for UNAMA, UN's presence in Afghanistan, despite the situation as it was. Russia abstained, but for the rest of it, we got a very good mandate, and I think that proves that that it is possible despite all the negative effects that absolutely are there. Thank you.
Okay, that's very good to hear, because one of the questions from the audience relates actually to the dynamics also amongst the P5 members. Stefano Shear would like to know, does the rupture among the P5 members also extend to China? And how does this then impact on other issues such as climate or conflicts and peacekeeping missions?
Well, I mean, I'll just very briefly jump in. I'm sure Mona will have something to say there. Look, I mean, I don't want anyone listening today to think that there is a completely dysfunctional Security Council here. We are, as you've just heard, doing our business. But the truth is, there is no one position on all of our agenda here, particularly by China. I mean, I would say, if you ask me, the answer is basically no. China is, you know, as you will have noticed, China abstained on the resolution on Ukraine on the Security Council, which Russia vetoed. China has consistently called for an end to the war and speaks very, very powerfully about the humanitarian challenges on the ground. They also, of course, have a different way of looking at the root causes of this conflict, and are, you know, traditionally sit on climate, for example, closer to Russia than to Norway and Ireland, that's for sure. But I think that China puts a great premium on the unity of the permanent members, and it's an uncomfortable position for everyone on the council. I think if you look at it, probably China is one of the countries that's most challenged by that discomfort. They are very concerned and have spoken consistently about territorial integrity. So, you know, they're not by any means adopting a position that I would argue is a Russian position for sure. But they're certainly in a position where there is scope for cooperation with them. We have been working with them across a range of files. The United States clearly working also with China as presidency this month, as I know they would like to do with all members, but the reality is we're in a unique situation. And since your question asked about climate, I don't see China changing its position on climate in any way linked to Ukraine. Their position wasn't supportive of our work on climate and security at the beginning.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Yeah, if I just could add once again, I agree with everything what has been said, and we have not experienced either sort of any sort of changes in what we see as a constructive engagement from China's side on to continue on all the other files despite their abstention on the resolution condemning the the invasion. But I think it's worthwhile to notice that there was no double veto, and they are, for instance, again on the Afghanistan mandate, for instance, working very constructively in order to make that happen. And I think for China it is important to continue to engage multilaterally in the way that they have sort of set out, and I don't think that they want this conflict or the war in Ukraine to sort of derail their sort of as they look at it, a very sort of constructive engagement multilaterally.
Thank you, Ambassador Juul. And let me follow up also with a question on one of your signature events during Norway's presidency in January, where you also hosted a retreat of the Security Council on preventive diplomacy and mediation. Norway, as I mentioned before, has a strong track record as a peace mediator, but we also have a UN which in many processes has often taken on the role of an observer or gets engaged in a later stage, or just on the level of implementing the peace agreements. Should and can discussions like the one you had recently, can they encourage and booster the role of the UN in mediation processes? And will we see perhaps a stronger engagement in the future?
That is absolutely, to your last point, that is absolutely our aim to make sure that the UN as such, the Security Council and the Secretary General, that we all spend much more time on preventive diplomacy. It is extremely important that we make sure that we are sort of looking into the horizon and see where there are potential for conflicts, and that we deal with that before it ends up in a war or in use of a violence. And there we all can be much better. And it also has a lot to do with the way we work in the council. We need to get more into the more informal, more direct talks and conversation also among us as members. We need this kind of retreating in order to speak more informally and really be more open to look for ways on how we can find solutions. And I think a very important part of the retreat that you mentioned, in addition to looking into a specific situation where we as Norway, but also where the Security Council had played an important role in peace processes, for instance, in Colombia, where the Security Council sort of adopted the peace process and the agreement and make sure that the implementation is going according to the agreements. We had also we asked also the Secretary General to set out his vision on preventive diplomacy, peace and mediation, and he said at that time, and I think what we see now, that he will give much more priority to that part of his mandate, and that he wanted to reinforce both the Secretariat and to be more active in that field. And that's why we are always supporting, promoting, and seeing how we can support the Secretary General's good offices in that area, which he has a strong mandate both in the Charter, but we should also, as a Security Council, support him in what he's doing.
Thank you, Ambassador Juul. As you just mentioned, also the kind of mediation role of the Secretary General, I would like to ask Ambassador Berninason on that topic of mediation, because what we have seen so far in the war in Ukraine, particularly also in the beginning, Mainly mediation initiatives have been taken on by individual states. It was in the beginning the ICRC trying to act as a facilitator, also for the establishment of evacuation corridors. And it's only recently, last week, when the Secretary General traveled to Moscow and Kiev, that it became a bit more prominent. Before, Guterres had kept quite a low profile. Also, if we take into consideration the kind of track record of the UN in mediation processes, and rightfully so, you mentioned Colombia as a positive best practice. But if we look at the kind of past track record, does the UN still have the political clout to mediate in a conflict? Meaning a mediation that also goes beyond the securing of humanitarian corridors in the sense of really hammering out a peace agreement?
Well, look, I'll give you a short answer to that. Does it still have the political clout? Absolutely, yes. And I think, if I may be colloquial, sometimes the Secretary General gets a bad rap. I think you used the term in your introduction that this is a stress test time for the UN. It's a stress test time clearly also for the Secretary General. And he is fond himself of saying that not everything he does is seen in public. And I think we need to remember that. It's true that at the beginning, he has made no secret of that President Putin wasn't very interested in talking to the UN and talking to the Secretary General. But the Secretary General himself, of course, from the very beginning of the conflict, called out the abrogation of the Charter, the abrogation of international law. And he also was active, as I say, in what we call quiet diplomacy in the background. Before his visit, which is what has captured the public imagination now, his visit to Moscow and Kyiv. But before that, he was really speaking to people who were also speaking directly to both of those capitals. He was publicly, from that fateful night of the 24th of February, when we sat beside him in the chamber, Mona and I, he was publicly calling for diplomacy and dialogue. He was managing those massive, horrific refugee flows we've seen. He was coordinating the fallout in relation to food, energy, finance, and very definitely with a huge UN operation being ramped up. And he was definitely supporting the accountability efforts already underway. I think he made it clear, even when he was on the ground during his visit, that where there are gaps and really, big challenges, let's put it bluntly, in the Security Council due to the veto, the UN is working to make up in terms of the action of the organization as a whole. The UN is not just the Secretary General, and the UN is certainly not just the Security Council. So, his own visits last week, his direct and public engagement with leaders, the concrete commitments he brought back, particularly, I have to say, in relation to the release of civilians in Mariupol, have been rather extraordinary. And, if there's any measure of success of a Secretary General, that he can save lives, I think, is an extraordinary testament to the man and to what he is delivering. It's humanitarian in nature, but I have absolutely no difficulty putting saving life every day above some qualification of being a political actor. I think the fact that President Putin and President Zelensky took the time to sit and listen to the Secretary General shows that they take this man seriously. And certainly I can tell you, my government, the governments of most of the countries around the Security Council have put their faith in Mr. Guterres to do this work on our behalf. His asks were definitely saving lives, absolutely what we would ask for. He has now opened channels of communication with both leaders. And I believe that opens and creates a space for the political mediation that Mona has referred to there, that has been so successfully done. But if you watch the timing, the staging and the timing of these interventions at political level need to be very careful. It's a very sensitive process. You save lives, create a space, open your channel of communication, and then assume the role. The UN will have a role in the politics and hopefully the resolution of this conflict. But the first thing the Secretary General has put his energy into, and I am 100% stand with him on this, is saving lives on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Definitely, it's the foremost task really to save the lives of the Ukrainians. Excellency, when we started out planning this exchange at the end of the last year, we really had in mind a kind of a stock-taking exercise about your first year on the Security Council. And I would also not like to have our limited time exclusively dedicated to the war in Ukraine. And I also would like to invite our audience again, please send me your questions in the chat box or in the Q&A part, so I can take it up, weave it into our conversation. But I would like to go a little bit away now from the war in Ukraine and the dynamics in the Council, because for both of your countries, the topic of women, peace and security is of utmost importance. And since the landmark resolution 1325 has been passed in the year 2000, much progress has been made, but evidently not enough. Ireland joined hands with Kenya and Mexico and Niger to make it a key theme of their presidencies last year. Norway also made a shared commitment amongst elected members of the Council and partnered with the United Arab Emirates and Albania. Ambassador Berninason, from your point of view and experience, what are key issues regarding women, peace and security which the Council still needs to address and has to be kept engaged?
Well, thank you for that. One of my all-time favorite questions, because anyone who knows me knows Ireland co-chairs the work on this women, peace and security, critical work on the Security Council alongside Mexico. And I'll start by saying, as an Irish woman, the women, peace and security agenda really is deeply personal for me as an Irish woman. The Northern Ireland Women's Coalition played an unforgettable key role really in bringing peace to the island of Ireland, and an ongoing role in keeping that peace process engaged and alive in my home country. And it's a clear example of the transformative power of bringing women to the table into the negotiations. And to go back to a point Mona made a little while ago about the Colombia peace process, I think the Colombia peace process is the only other example really internationally of a peace process where we can point to the critical role of women. And that's disappointing estimation on my part, I'll admit. Now, at the Council, Resolution 1325 really sets out the broad framework for the kind of participation that can arise in any crisis on our agenda. There aren't crises that are particularly amenable to women and others that aren't. This applies to all of the work of the Security Council. And there have been subsequent resolutions, but we keep coming back to the basic point, which is let's get on with the job and implement that framework in Resolution 1325. And the fact is, and it's not an analysis and it's not an opinion, it's a fact, that women's participation in peace processes today, as we speak, is unacceptably low. In Syria, where we have an excellent representative of the Secretary General in Geir Pedersen, he is working as a special envoy in engaging with the Women's Advisory Board. I speak to him about it each time he comes to the Security Council, but he also recognizes, as we do, that advisory board isn't a substitute for actually having women directly participating in the negotiations, for example, in the Constitutional Committee in Syria. In Yemen, we've just seen new political entities now without a single woman being nominated, 50% of the population excluded from those boards, or those entities rather. And then there are countries which Mona is very involved with also on the Council, Afghanistan, where not just the women not being included, they are being absolutely excluded, and their fundamental rights are being eroded and attacked. So throughout the year that we've been on the Security Council, Ireland has really called for the Council to step up its action in this area. We need to see women, we need to hear them, and we need, importantly, to heed them in the work that we're doing to build peace. And this applies to women human rights defenders, it applies to women peace builders, to civil society representatives, grassroots women who right across the globe do extraordinary work at community level that's fundamental ultimately to societal development and peace and security in their societies. And during the Irish presidency of the Security Council last September, we tried to give a clear example of what we meant when we moved from that rhetorical, women in the room and at the table. We brought a record number of women civil society representatives to the Security Council table to speak and to be heard on each of the agenda items we were dealing with. Now, you mentioned, and thank you for that, the TRIO initiative that we started with Ireland, Kenya, and Mexico. And the aim there was very simple, to move away from that rhetorical positioning into a reality that over the agenda, we wouldn't just be flashing this initiative in some, as I say, a way that captures attention, but we'd actually be doing the job at the table consistently, month by month, bringing the issue to the forefront. And we were thrilled to see that Norway also joined then. So it wasn't just a trio, but we've added countries, Niger and then Norway as we went. So we're delighted that other countries have taken this up. So to finish, I think there's an enormous distance to go still, and I regret that sincerely. We won't stop while we're on the council arguing for the participation of women in peace process and public life. But in our own way, modest enough, I think we're moving that needle ever slowly, but ever forward as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And Ambassador, for you, it's a question very dear to your heart. What do you see, particularly if we look at the kind of operational level, how can we address those shortcomings in the implementation of WPS, particularly in conflict settings and also in those settings where perhaps also cultural constraints have to be overcome in order to enhance the role of women?
I think I will answer your question by pointing to what Norway did during our presidency and on one of our signature event on women, peace and security, focusing on the huge problem of reprisals against human rights defenders, briefers from civil society that we invite to come to the council. We did the same as Ireland, having sort of throughout our presidency only female briefers from on all the files that we had on the agenda. But the problem that women, human rights defenders, women who engaged in peace process, women that speaks out on the need for including women in sort of the political and life in their country, engaging in peacemaking and peace building, are, I mean, it's horrible what some of them are being faced with. I mean, harassment, violence, even being killed. And what we did during our presidency and at our signature event was to invite civil society and to invite our fellow council members, but also all other members of the UN to come up and really look into concrete recommendation on how we can make sure that we protect those women who speaks out, that engage in processes. And I think we had a very, very good meeting, in a sense that there were sort of concrete proposals. And we worked also very actively ourselves to make sure that our briefers that came to the council, that there are mechanisms set up with the help absolutely of the UN system, the different organizations, civil society organizations on the ground, to make sure that we have mechanism that protects women. Because I mean, I think Geraldine described very eloquently the challenges that are enormous in that area, but you can make sure that together with Ireland, Norway is always putting these issues at the forefront.
Thank you. And actually, I have one question particularly relating also to this very close collaboration and coordination that you two have, but how does it look with the other 3 European members? Yes, certainly you share the same values and the kind of estimation for human rights, support for the ICC. And Ursula Meckler, one participant, would like to know how does the coordination, collaboration with other European members, with France, with the UK, with Albania, plays out in the Security Council?
I'll quickly jump in there. Look, you know, we have very close cooperation with the other European members, Ireland and France, a little core in there as the only EU members on the council. But to be frank, the European mindset in terms of our commitment to principles on human rights, on accountability. For example, today we see Michelle Bachelet coming to the Security Council, something that we would all as Europeans fully support and stand behind. You know, we also, if I can take concrete country situations where I could be sure we're all in Europe like-minded. I mentioned Myanmar, we've spoken about Ukraine, Afghanistan, very clear examples of countries where we coordinate closely. And then there are broader thematic issues where, for example, France's role on climate, the Paris Accord, and then translating that into wider commitments at the Security Council on the link between climate and security, very much like-minded, of course, with Norway, but also with Albania, with France, and the United Kingdom hosting the COP was clearly this year another thing that united all of us. So, you know, we've just spoken about women, peace and security. I don't think you could, again, we could exchange notes as like-minded on those issues. So there's a wide range of issues that we coordinate on. You sometimes see in a public way that the European Union has stakeouts. And I think as a clear reflection of the like-mindedness, you'll very often see Mona standing with us, very often see our Albanian and our British colleagues, despite the fact that they took, I think, a very regrettable decision to leave the European Union. They occasionally come and join us at those stakeouts. That's an expression of the common principles and vision on everything from, as I say, accountability to human rights, international law, that unites us as like-minded members of the council. So very much in the family, in the way we act and the way we think there.
Can I just add there, and I again agree fully with what Geraldine has said. I just want to say that of course we join. I mean, we are standing on the same grounds on values and principle and work very closely. At the same time, I think also that, and I know that Geraldine, I think he agrees with me that it is also important for us Westerners also then to be able to reach out and to sort of be a kind of bridge builder also vis-a-vis of course the 2 other non-Western P5s, but also of course to other countries, being it A3, the Africans, being it of course other members. I think we, not that we sort of are in sort of a middle position on issues, because we are very well grounded in the sort of in the Western sphere, but it's certainly also important and our sort of bridge building capacity as and I don't think it makes much difference being a EU or not, but not being a EU member, I think we also see a role there. Thank you.
And Andrea, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay, now it's me. Now I would like to stay with Ambassador Yule, because you mentioned already the kind of attention you have given to women human rights defenders during your presidency. You really try to enhance civil society participation in your working method commitment. You also enhance the transparency around the work of the Security Council by having this complete digital work plan on your mission's website, but particularly in relation to the civil society participation. And this is also where another question from the audience ties in very nicely. Philippa Whitford asked, how can we get more women voices to the table on the biggest crisis we face, which is the climate crisis, as women are the ones who are bearing the brunt, who have to work the land and source water for the families. How can we get more civil society participation into the council, in open briefings, but also closed consultations? But we have seen also the constraints you face on the council to have this kind of interaction. What makes it so difficult, and how can we ensure that very good initiatives that you have launched, Ireland has launched, by improving working methods, really become a kind of an institutionalized continuum and will not be phased out again after the next or very next presidency? How can we really enshrine this in a kind of a corpus of the Security Council?
I think we have come a long way with making sort of a standard for not only for presidencies but for all members now in the council to make sure that we bring in civil society voices. I mean, for us as Norway is sort of part of our DNA, so we will always make sure that civil society get there at the right place. But I also have sort of a strong feeling that this is sort of now really becoming a norm, and we have seen that also for other presidencies. So I think we are moving in the right direction. And as I said, during our presidency, we not only made sure that civil society were present, but also that we mainly had women, even on the debate. And now I come to your climate part. Even during the debate on the Middle East, we brought in civil society actors from Israel and Palestine that are working on environmental issues between Israel, Palestine, and Jordan. So we managed to bring also the climate, the environment issue into the debate on the Middle East from a civil society perspective. So and not least when it comes to Afghanistan, I mean, we have made sure that we have brought the very strong women voices of Afghanistan into the council, into the to all kinds of meetings that we have arranged also on the sideline. But for them to meet with council members, I think was very important also in order to get that strong mandate on UNAMA or the UN's presence in Afghanistan. So I think we see ourselves as actually quite consistent in bringing those voices also then when it comes to climate issues. Thank you.
If I could just echo what Mona has said there, I mean, this is really a critical issue. And I think as Ireland and Norway look back at legacies, if you can do that about our time in the council, we will both be proud of what we've done in terms of ensuring the voice of civil society at the table, and particularly women. And on climate, if I can also take an opportunity to recommend to everyone listening, there's a wonderful book written by Mary Robinson entitled Climate Justice, where she takes 11 women and their stories about their fight for climate justice and brings it to the table, as it were. So I'd recommend you look at that. During the Irish presidency in September, we brought in an amazing Somalian woman, Ilwad Elman, to the table to speak about the challenges. And we know, of course, that her challenges are shared pastoralist communities in places like Chad, where women every day are walking hundreds and hundreds of well, they're not walking hundreds of kilometers, they're walking long distances to find water, to find food for their families, all due to climate challenges. Mona touched there importantly on something that I'd like just to emphasize. She spoke about Afghanistan. We've also seen women from Ethiopia who came in and spoke about their conflict-related sexual violence experiences. This takes courage by women to come to the table. And I think we shouldn't underestimate the risks involved for some women in speaking publicly at the Security Council. And we have had women human rights defenders who have been very challenged, and I'm using that term diplomatically, as a result of their time at the Security Council speaking publicly. So I did want to just say that there is a need to safeguard women in particular who take that courageous step to join us as members of civil society. We want to hear them. Governments need to hear directly from them, but it takes courage, and it takes also on our part, assuming our responsibility as members of the council to safeguard those brilliant women, the brilliant non-governmental organizations. And I'll give a shout out here for Kavya, that we both know Mona, who does such tremendous work in the NGO working group to protect the women who step up. So we're doing our best, but more work needed for sure.
Thank you, Ambassador Bernie Nason. Let me stay also with Ireland and the presidency you had, where you also proposed a resolution on UN peace operation transitions, the transition that acknowledged the need to have a strategic and context-centered approach to the drawdowns and the transition from a peacekeeping mission to a special political mission. A lot of emphasis has been placed on the kind of phasing out of long-term peacekeeping missions, such as the one in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where the prevailing conflict still exists. Nothing has changed much in the east of the country, and multiple actors still terrorize the civilian population. Ambassador, what would you say that the resolution 2594 will achieve? Will it caution future decision makers on making hasty decisions on peacekeeping operations? What do you see as the added value of this transition resolution?
Well, look, again, another favorite question for an Irish diplomat, because peacekeeping is a huge DNA issue for us. We like to speak of ourselves as the only one with an unbroken record over well over 60 years now. It means a lot to us that we were able to come forward with something practical and pragmatic in that resolution during our tenure on the council. I think the important thing that resolution did, we're replete with cautionary tales. You mentioned some about how this sometimes doesn't work when in Sudan, DRC, when the UN peacekeeping operations move off, there's almost a cliff face hanging there, particularly that impacts on civilians. So the important thing the resolution did was, in a way, to clear the decks and to say, this is what a transition is. This is what a reconfiguration of the UN presence looks like. This is what national ownership needs to look like in terms of continuing what is a peace building function. And so it's sort of trying to set out a framework to help countries that are in this difficult pinch point transition. We're turning essentially the resolution into a Secretary General's instrument to help with that moment when the UN moves on. It looks at how the UN can coordinate, integrate its work right across the system. And it also feeds, and the Secretary has said this directly to us, it feeds directly into his big project on the reform of UN peacekeeping. Now, what we have done with this, and I'll shorten my answer because I think we're short on time. What we have done is not just put a resolution on the table and adopt it. We have then taken those elements, and every time a mandate for peacekeeping arises at the Security Council table, we integrate the elements of that transition 2594 into the pragmatic resolution. So if you look carefully, you'll see that language now, that mandate in UNMISS, in MONUSCO, in UNFICIP, and I know you all know what these acronyms are. And I just wanted to point out that this isn't only a Security Council consideration. There were 97 members of the UN who co-sponsored that resolution Ireland put on the table. I think that shows that countries that are not at the Security Council, who are hosting peacekeeping missions, thought it mattered. Important donors who support the work on the ground when countries move into that transition phase, they signed up to show that they think it mattered. And now in summer, we're really looking forward to the Secretary General. It will remarkably be soon almost a year since we adopted the resolution. We'll see that first report from the Secretary General, and I'm hoping we're going to see the impact it's had on the ground. And that's the purpose of this. It wasn't to adopt a resolution that stays in that beautiful chamber. It's to actually see it worked out on the ground.
Thank you. Excellencies, Ambassador Bernie Nason, I think we learned a lot about the dynamics on the Council from our conversation of the last hours, but also you highlighted very well the achievements you could have as an elected member on the Council over the last 1.5 years. Let me ask a last question. What would you like to see still accomplished by the end of the year? What is remaining on your to-do list if you are now planning ahead towards the end of your mandate?
That's a difficult question, because there are so many things we would have liked to done and to do, and we see that literally time is running out, not only for this conversation, but also we probably have just 7-8 months to go, but certainly we feel that we have already done quite a lot, and we also think that it is very important as elected member to move quickly and in the beginning of our terms, because the unexpected happens, and of course. I mean, now the situation in the Council might make it more difficult to get things that we want to get done, but we will not give up pursuing our agenda, and we are still working on important initiatives and resolution. One of them being piracy in the Gulf of Guinea, a very, very important initiative that we are working together with Ghana on, within women, peace and security, within preventive diplomacy, within all the priority areas of ours. We will continue to work very hard to make if not a big difference, but maybe a small difference in making the world a better place. Thank you.
Well, if I just jump in on Mona's coattails, I couldn't agree more. Modest difference in making the world a better place. That's what we all signed up for as elected members at the Security Council. We're not about big flashy initiatives. We're about actually making a difference. When Ireland was campaigning for the Council, we spoke about partnership, independence and empathy. And I hope that we can continue for the time that's left to stand by those. But above all, to use Mona's term there about the unpredictable, that whatever the unpredictable is, that we stand by our principles and our values. I think that's a real test for countries that are elected, that we can look back and say that we always spoke about the need to preserve international humanitarian law and international law. Both of us together have a very immediate big project that I hope we can accomplish together in July, which is the delivery of that critical Syria humanitarian resolution that saves lives, millions of people depending on that resolution for medical, food aid, but also Ireland then in the medium term, the focal point of the Council on conflict and hunger. And if there is a moment where the Council needs to recognise its responsibilities, whether that's in Ukraine or Yemen, in Syria, in Afghanistan, where we have a huge humanitarian crisis, in Ethiopia that concerns Ireland absolutely today, where trucks delivering food and medical aid are not getting through to the people who need it. We hope we'll continue to take our courage in our hands and to speak out about those. And as Mona put it, to make that small, modest difference. You won't stop us speaking out about women, peace and security, about the peacekeeping transition issue that we just mentioned, about the inclusiveness that I know Norway and Ireland believe this, that our civil society partners should be involved in the discussions. But to come back to Mona's point, you know, we realize that we're in a very complex environment here, and we're going to take this step by step. But you'll always know where to find us, because we'll be standing behind those common values and principles that we spoke about before we both had the honor to be elected on that day. Soon our anniversary, Mona, in June of 2 years ago now. So thank you very much again for hearing us this morning.
Now we have to thank you for this excellent conversation and the real insights into the Security Council dynamics and the agenda Ireland and Norway has on the council. We only can wish you good luck for the remaining months, that you really can push your agenda and the points you mentioned through. In the name of my colleagues, Gabriele Baumann, the representative for the Nordic countries, but also my colleague who unfortunately couldn't join us, Matthias Barner, who is the head of the office of CAS in the UK and Ireland. We want to give you a sincere word of appreciation for having taken the time, for being with our audience, and we hope that we will be in touch and work perhaps towards the end of your presidency in one or the other format again with you. So thank you very much and all the best.